Good morning, Roberta. Good morning, everyone. And thank you very much for being here with us today on a Saturday morning. It's always a pleasure to be talking to teachers, and it's always a pleasure to be here in this event, which was organized beautifully by Colégio Farroupilha, which is an authorized center for Cambridge Assessment English. I could follow the chat while Professor Ivan was giving his talk, and I could be listening to Professor Ivan for hours because of his clarity and all the ideas he has helped and worked very hard with a group of people to put together so that we now have this document, Diretrizes para a Educação Plurilingüe. I think it was a very, very important document for our education. And there are very, very important points there that I believe will help our country to make a difference in education. And as he said himself, it's not just about being a bilingual school. It's about a number of things. It's about a number of effects. And I think there is somehow a connection with what Colégio Farroupilha has been doing in their history with the Cambridge exams and the impact, the positive impact all the implementation has had on the students, on the results, and on the fact that students now leave the school with the possibility of prove their skills to the world. I'm now adding here, as part of my speech, our mission as Cambridge Assessment English, which is to help learners to learn English and prove their skills to the world. And I'm sure that students from Colégio Farroupilha and from the prep centers that are supported by Colégio Farroupilha can now do once they have developed their skills and they are ready to, to prove it out there in the world with a certificate. This is very, very important. So good morning to you all. And once again, thanks for your presence this Saturday morning. Today, we are going to talk about the Cambridge exams and their positive impact on the students' lives. I think we have a long history of impact to share with you. I mean, Cambridge Assessment English, as you know, is a department from the University of Cambridge, and it has existed for over a century, which means there is a lot of data, a lot of good stories, and a lot of evidence of positive impact in many parts of the world. So I'm going to move to my slides here to give you an outline of what we are going to talk about today. So we're going to start talking about the principles of good practice from Cambridge Assessment English and how those principles are present in the exams. We are going to talk about impact. I believe that after hearing Professor Ivan, I think impact is a very, very important word, and we're going to explore a little bit of what it is. It's going to be basically an overview because impact means we have a lot to talk about, and 30 minutes would not be enough. We are going to give you this snapshot of potential assessment effects by stakeholder groups. So when we're talking about an educational system and how we can implement certain changes, we can establish certain standards, this can impact the many different stakeholders in the community. So we're going to look at those stakeholders more clearly, and we're going to talk about some steps to help us look ahead into the future. I think after the document now from the Ministry of Education, Brazil will have a lot to do in terms of planning so that we can look ahead for a brighter future. We're going to start with a quick question for you. I have this acronym here, VRIP, V-R-I-P. Can you type in the chat what you think the words, the letters stand for? So, I mean, you don't have to, if you don't know, don't worry, you can give a guess. We are not going to grade you. You're not going to lose marks, but I would like you to participate a little bit and try and give me some of the possibilities of what those letters stand for. So I'm going to go to the chat and see what guesses we have here. What do you think the letters stand for? Oh, I think my microphone has a bit of an issue. Okay. Thank you, Kayla, for pointing this out. Can you type in the chat what you think the letters stand for? We have one guess here. Good. The answers are coming through. Okay, please. Any more guesses? Okay, I think Kayla has a very good guess. Excellent. Márcio, what a good guess. You are very, very close, Márcio. Very, very close. Yes, I for impact, by all means. Yes, that's good. Wow, Lillian, well done. You've got most things right. Just one little thing. Okay, let's go and check what those letters stand for. So VRIP, well, V stands for validity. It's one of the principles of good practice. And by validity, we mean are our exams an authentic test of real life English? This is something that Cambridge works very, very hard through research and through collecting data to make sure that the exams focus on authentic test of real life English. Real life English means communication skills, making sure that students are able to communicate and that they can demonstrate that they have those competencies for communicating in the different skills and in the different contexts. R stands for reliability. So by reliability, we mean do our exams behave consistently and fairly? So fairness is one of the key principles that is taken into consideration in the exams and through the exams, so that students in different contexts, in different countries, they have a positive experience and that they are assessed consistently, right? So I for impact, it's going to be the focus of our talk today. So do our assessments have a positive effect on teaching and learning? This is something that is constantly investigated, and nowadays more and more, firstly because there are many more students taking the exams nowadays. Just to give you an overview from 2019, before the pandemic, 7 million candidates took the exams around the world in 1 year. So that is a lot. So there is a lot of research checking the impact and whether the impact is positive. P for practicality. In other words, do the assessments meet learners' needs within available resources? So is it practical for the learners in terms of meeting their needs? And is there support and resources for the learners? Of course, we have here 4 key areas. Each of those areas means we could spend hours and hours discussing, because researchers have been studying and publishing papers and reports on each of those areas for decades. But we have another letter which is not there, which is quality. Quality is very important. It has to do with how we, Cambridge, plan, deliver, and check that we provide excellence in all of those fields, in all of those 4 areas. So it's a lot of work by a number of specialized professionals in Cambridge and around the world, making sure that the exams will do what they are expected to do for the learners. But for the purposes of this talk, we are going to focus on impact. Again, do our assessments have a positive effect on teaching and learning? When we're talking about impact, I think we need to go back to a word which has to do with impact. Sometimes this word is used interchangeably, but it's not necessarily impact. Washback, as you can see here, is part of the impact. So it has to do with the possible effects of tests on teaching and learning, right? So washback is seen as a continuum. It's not something that is part of one single experience of sitting external exams or international exams, but it's part of a continuum. It has to do with this impact that it's going to have on teaching and learning, especially during preparation for the exams. So when we're talking about washback, we want to check whether the washback is or will be negative or harmful. That is, it will impact teaching and learning in such a way that learners will not be able to learn, develop, and demonstrate certain skills because there is a special type of preparation, or there is a belief that students should be prepared for the test only, and then all the rest related to education, like formative assessment, making sure that students work and develop skills, work together, work in groups. They talk about things that make sense to them. All those things are disregarded, right? So it can be negative or harmful. It can be neutral. We don't want washback to be negative, and we don't want it to be neutral either. We want washback, above all, to be positive and beneficial for the learners, for the teachers, and for the educational system above all, right? So, in other words, we are talking about some of those factors here. We are talking about the impact of the washback on the individual learners, on teachers' attitudes and behavior. If you have a context where teachers are teaching to the test only, that can be quite harmful in the sense that other elements of language learning will be disregarded. We are talking about the washback in classroom environment. We want it to be positive in a way that students feel motivated to learn, that they understand that they are developing the skills and they feel the confidence to communicate, and they feel also the sense of achievement. And it's also to do with the choice and use of teaching and learning materials to help students develop those skills, right? So washback has to do with the micro universe of the teacher, the learner, the classroom, the teaching practices, the assessment practices as well. So when we're talking about impact, I think we sort of zoom in, we amplify the scope, because impact has to do with a number of things that are related to the universe of the classroom, but it goes beyond this universe as well. So it has to do with the impact on the career or life changes of individual test takers. So students take the test, they get their certificate, and then they're going to go forward in their lives to develop, to do courses, to get a job, to get a promotion in the job. So it has to do with how those experiences will impact their career, their future, the opportunities in education and employment. It has to do with impact on educational systems, what kind of arrangements will need to be made in terms of curriculum, in terms of materials, in terms of continuous professional development of the teachers, how to involve the families in this process. And it has to do with impact on society more widely. So how the results of the tests are going to be used so that decisions can be made in terms of school curriculum planning, funding allocation for professional development, for example, for the inclusion of other resources, immigration policies. I mean, some countries will request that you have a certain level of English for you to migrate either to study or to live. And also for licensing professionals. We know that we have special qualifications for example, doctors and nurses if they are to work in an English-speaking country. And of course, the impact goes further to, to affect publishers, how they're going to prepare the test preparation materials and materials in general. And of course, the impact on institutions, how they're going to run the preparation courses, making sure that they focus on the beneficial washback and that they don't just prepare to the test, but they focus a lot on developing the skills that need to be developed, for life, really. So we have a diagram here which shows impact and washback. Washback is very important, but it's one part of impact, since impact goes beyond the classroom, and we want it to be positive outside the school as well. So in terms of impact, Luciane started her talk this morning talking about the impact all the implementation of the exams had, Colégio Farroupilha. So in 2010, they had a number of students at a certain level of language. So they established different parameters. They established higher linguistic targets so that the students could sit more advanced level exams. And now students can finish the school with a C2 certificate in their hands, right? Of course, we are talking about a very, very well organized project from one school, but I would like to make a connection with what's happening now in Brazil when Professor Ivan was talking about the guidelines for plurilingual education. This is a very, very important starting point in our country where we now have some clear guidelines to follow. It's not the case of us agreeing or disagreeing for the time being, because I'm sure those things, they tend to be reviewed in the future. There will be additions to it, there will be changes to it. So at the moment, with the document that we have, it means that we know where we need to turn to, where do we need to invest resources, where do we need to invest efforts in order to make changes and establish the goals and make sure that we work in all the different areas to achieve those goals, right? So this is one example of what happened with Colégio Farroupilha. When we compare, for example, with the expected levels of learners in the guidelines for plurilingual education, for example, students at sexto ano, for a school that wants to be bilingual, they should reach level A2. Students at nono ano, they are expected to reach level B1, and students at terceiro ano do ensino médio, level B2. There is also a expected standard for teachers to be at level B2 minimum. But as I said, those targets, those goals, they are the goals for now. They are the starting point. It means that, for example, what Colégio Farroupilha has managed to achieve nowadays is a result of a lot of work that happened, and it didn't change from day to night. There was a gradual process where a lot of work happened in many different areas so that nowadays they could come to such an impact in terms of language development. I remember in the event, the Cambridge Experience event last year, students who left Colégio Farroupilha, they reported that they had that they felt comfortable facing the challenges of recruitment processes for work or for higher education outside Brazil. And they were really comfortable talking about their experiences in English. And we did this impact study that we reported on last year. And one of the things students said is that they don't fear the day of the exam because it's so part of the process. It's as important as everything else that is done in the school throughout the year, that they don't see this as the day to be nervous. It's just part of what they have to do, right? This leads us to consider, for example, all the different areas where impact can happen. So we have here in this snapshot a group of stakeholders involved in education. We have the students, we have the teachers, we have the parents, we have the educational systems. And I think when we compare Brazil 1 year ago without the guidelines and Brazil this year with the guidelines, it's much clearer to understand which role each of those stakeholders will need to play in the process, right? So when we look at, for example, the students, if, for example, in your school or in your language institute, you want, if you don't do this yet, and you want to implement the exams, you need to consider how this is going to impact students' motivation, their behavior towards the exam, and of course, and above all, their learning outcomes. The purpose is not to say here that the exams will be miraculous and will immediately solve all the problems in the institution. This honestly doesn't happen, because when you implement something like this in your educational system, you have to make sure that a lot of work is done with students, with families, and with teachers for the benefit of the learners and also for the experience to become positive, right? With any exam, really. So in terms of students, sharing with students what the exam is, what it looks like, the kind of teaching practices that will happen and will eventually lead the students to feel confident in demonstrating those competencies for the exam will impact on motivation, and of course they will feel more confident, more motivated, and to behave in a way that will be positive for them when they come to do the exams, right? And of course, focusing on learning outcomes that will lead students to actually demonstrate that they have good communication skills. They might be able to communicate even if they don't know the specific pronunciation of the verb think, or if they don't know that the past of think is thought. But they can still communicate, and I think it's very important to take this into consideration, leading the students to communicate. And of course, as you do so, you work on the different areas of, for example, accuracy of grammar, accuracy of pronunciation, but not focusing primarily on accuracy, and not giving the students the opportunity to develop communication skills. When we're talking about teachers, if we say, for example, that the exams focus on students demonstrating that they can communicate in real life, this has impact on teaching practices as well. If teaching practices are all about teaching grammar solely, of course, the students will not be able to demonstrate that they have good communication skills. They can memorize a whole table of irregular verbs, but that doesn't mean that they will be able to apply all this knowledge in communication. So the teaching practices will need also to enable students to develop those skills, build their confidence in communication, and build the confidence of the teachers in developing those skills. And of course, this will impact professional development. Teachers involved in exams, they are also involved in assessment. They discuss assessment in more detail. Some teachers become examiners as well for the speaking paper, which means this is a step in professional development because they need to work with criteria, training, retraining, and eventually this impacts on teaching practice, making sure that teachers address criteria in their teaching practices, for example, and not only develop the criteria, but share criteria with learners. One of the questions we received prior to this event, because you could ask questions, was about the assessment of speaking, the development of speaking skills, and it was also about rubrics for assessing speaking. One of the things that we use to assess speaking is a set of rubrics, and they can serve as a tool for teachers to use in the classroom while helping the students develop those skills. I'm using speaking as an example, but it's also true for writing skills and also helping the students to develop the other skills such as listening and reading, right? So there is a lot of professional development that is impacted by this. Thinking of impact in terms of Brazil, what the document that Professor Ivan talked about establishes for professional development for teachers, I think it's a very, very sound initial step for teachers to develop certain skills in order to be able to teach with confidence. And eventually, I think this will improve teaching practices, and hopefully the washback will be positive in the future. Parents also play a very important role in this process because they need to engage with the school, and there should be a lot of communication for that purpose, right? And also, if you are in a school, you teach young learners, teenagers, and you need the families to support with this as well. They are the ones who will set the alarm clock early in the morning and who will be in charge of making sure that learners are doing their homework, for example, that they are engaging as much as they should. And they're the ones we teachers turn to when we need students to become better committed, right? So they need to be involved and they need to understand why the school is offering certain opportunities, such as allowing the students to sit an international exam to get a recognized certificate, right? It's very, very important support, and they need to be involved in this process as well. It's not just about paying for a test, but it's all the impact that it will have on learning, on the learners, and of course in their futures. And educational systems also, they are impacted when you make some changes, when you establish parameters such as making sure that students reach level X, Y, or Z in the Common European Framework, because for that to happen, you need professional development with the teachers, you need communication with students and parents, but you also need to make internal changes such as making sure that the curriculum will help you to reach those linguistic targets, right? Learning materials, are they appropriate? Do they help students to develop those skills, or it's just sheer grammar practice? And of course, there allocation of funding for the teams in charge of the administration, because if you need to implement things, you need to consider budget, and so you see the impact goes beyond what happens in the classroom only, right? Um, this is not to say that because you want to use the exams or you want to increase your levels of proficiency at certain moments of your program, it's going to be very, very hard work for you. It's something that is part of education. I mean, for education to improve at national level, Professor Ivan mentioned today, the document comes as a very good reference. Now we have clearer directions in terms of what to do, of what to implement. So it's the same in your own institution. You need to consider all those areas. You need, or at least to understand that all those areas will be impacted for the experience to be positive for everyone involved here, the learners, the parents, the school, society as a whole. So in terms of looking ahead, make sure that for you to implement the exams and for the students to be successful and for the experience to be positive, diagnose the current levels of proficiency and establish realistic linguistic targets for your program, right? There is no right answer for that. I mean, at this moment, Colégio Farroupilha is at a specific standard. Your standard could be lower, but it's not a problem as long as your targets are realistic for your context, right? So we need to start by diagnosing the levels of proficiency of learners, teachers, making sure that you know what the next step will be in terms of levels, right? But make it realistic. And aim for positive washback. So don't focus just on the day of the exam. Before the exam, during preparation, during the academic year, make sure that you include a number of different assessment practices. So be generous with feedback and be specific with feedback as well to learners, and make feedback regular for learners. So make sure that you give constant feedback on the skills development. Make sure that if you have had your exam sessions, the process does not stop there. We always see this as a cycle. I mean, the scores from the exam will give you a lot of information about the kinds of changes you may need to implement for the next cohort of candidates. So, use the scores, and use this evidence-based approach for you to make new changes. So you have some scores. You might see that overall, the previous cohort was very weak at listening skills. So maybe you might need to include more listening practice in your teaching practices, in your curriculum. And also understand and try to imagine what kind of impact you want this to have on the career and life chances of individual students. It's very important to consider what they're going to do next when they reach that level and get their certificate, or when they leave school. You need to bear this in mind in order to make adjustments to your program to give students this preparation, not only for the exam, but for life, really. They will be using all those competencies and skills and their certificates for a purpose in the future, right? Since we are talking about evidence and taking an evidence approach to this, measure the results along the way. I think one of the things the exams can give you is this amount of data through which you can you can base your decisions on those bits of information from the exams. We have portals, for example, that allow prep centers to collect data and compare performance, their students' performance with performance in the country and performance in the world. It will indicate which areas the school is really strong, which areas the school will probably need to make certain adjustments. So keep measuring the results along the way. And above all, integrate learning and assessment. The exam is not the only assessment. It's not your achievement test, right? You have your assessment along the way throughout the school year through a number of instruments that you use and a number of practices as well. You have the homework, you have the projects that the students do. So make sure that you integrate learning and assessment, because above all, I think the outcomes we want to get to are the learning outcomes, right? And you will hear a lot more about integrating learning and assessment in the next session with Ben Knight and Green Hughes, our dear guest speakers. So I suppose from now on, Roberto, I have some references for you. I believe the team in Colégio Farroupilha will make this available for you. Most of the references here are free access, right? In case you want to find out more about impact. And with that, Roberto, I think I'm ready for questions.
Thank you, Alberto. It's very good. It's always good to hear from you, to participate in your talks. And some people even made comments here in the chat about how nice it is to listen to you talking about the different topics. So, Alberto, everyone, if you have any questions, please type on the chat. There are people helping us here. But we do have a few questions that came before the event, as we asked them to send us questions that they wanted us to ask. So you talked about assessing students and the positive impact, and you also talk about the impact on behavior on the students themselves. So how can we here there is a question talking about motivation, especially considering these times, right, where this very challenging time. So how can you keep students motivated, considering this also an impact on their behavior, because this is something, right, related to their behavior?
Yes. Well, because we are living a pandemic in our generation that we have never lived before, we don't have a recipe for those things, but I believe that we can use assessment as a way of motivating the learners. And when I say assessment here, I'm not directly talking about the exams, but what you can do in the classroom in order to make sure that students engage more. I think one of the things we need to consider is that, and teachers have learned, in the hard way, that teaching remotely is not like teaching in the classroom. So we need to make a lot of adjustments to our dynamics. And I think also what we need to consider here is giving the students specific targets with very specific criteria, and always making sure that we are starting small and leading the students to more challenging tasks, right? I think students, they lack motivation, but the whole situation is so unusual that it's difficult to come up with one solution. But use assessment to motivate. Always give students, for example, if you are giving them project or tasks, give students more than one opportunity to do something, so they feel more confident. If they are writing something, give them the chance to redraft at least twice. If you want them to do speaking projects, work with them in the rehearsal, assess them for their efforts in the rehearsal, praise every single effort they make, because I think this will, in the end, impact on motivation positively.
Yes. Confidence as well, right?
Yeah.
Alberto. So one more question here. What are the limitations of the assessment of the speaking skills? They ask specifically about speaking skills.
Yes. I think speaking is one of those things that some people tend to feel not confident, or either because they are shy, or because they will have this feeling that they will be immediately judged by their speech. I think one of the things that we need to consider for speaking is the kind of environment that we provide and that we create with learners. I think for speaking to happen more frequently, I think students need to feel that they are in a safe environment where they don't have the sense of being judged, where they don't have the sense of being corrected all the time, and always making sure that when we start speaking, it's not about putting the student on the spot. In the same way that we help students with writing skills by giving them frames of texts, we need to do the same with speaking. Speaking has an added element when we compare with writing, the element of pronunciation. So providing good pronunciation practice, giving the students the opportunity to practice, to feel confident, always value what students can do and not focus what they cannot do. When we create a positive environment, I think speaking will become, more frequent in class. I don't know if I have time, but this week I had the opportunity to talk to a group of over 200 students in school. They were all kind of nono ano, primeiro ano do ensino médio. And then I said, well, they are teenagers. They are using their cameras. I don't know how they are going to behave. So, before thinking of opening my camera and asking them questions, I gave them a number of activities about questions. And in the end, I used the questions to ask them questions. Turns out I could do anything else because they had so many questions to ask me that they created themselves. I think it has to do with this approach that you create an environment that is positive, and then students will speak up.
Thank you, Alberto. Thank you. We have time for one more question. First, we have a comment. In my situation, like teacher says, teaching in a medium-sized city in the center of Brazil, the impact of the exam is limited to a question of social standing instead of a real understanding of the benefits for life. It is quite a challenge, but we do need to keep showing how positive those impacts are. This impact is, right, Alberto?
Yeah, I think also it has to do with bringing or shedding some light, or bringing information to a community. For example, at school, what do the other students do with those certificates? Especially nowadays, where you are in a place, but you are at the same time anywhere in the world, because people are communicating online more and more. So also showing that even though they are located somewhere in Brazil, it means they can communicate, with the whole world. Not only that, a lot of people now are getting jobs in companies outside Brazil, but they are in Brazil working in their place, probably in a beach house, but they are working for a company elsewhere, because this is what the world is like nowadays. So shedding some light into the results, the positive results for learners, I think it would be nice to bring that to the community.
Alberto, we have actually time is up, but we have one last question. So if you could answer it very quickly, do you think that it is important to engage the parents, explaining them about the importance of the tests for having their help to also focus on the process we teachers want to offer to students, Alessandra Coutinho asks.
I will say that very bluntly. Yes, as a teacher, I have been doing that all my life. I'm not going to say it's easy, but it's possible with good communication and making sure that we bring the results to parents as well. I mean, parents want good education for their kids, so they will eventually realize it is important.
Thank you, Alberto. Again, thank you 1,000 times for being so kind and helpful and share your ideas with us.